In 4 years' time, when the Summer Olympic Games are hosted in Los Angeles, cricket will be on the schedule and a curious statistic will arise. When the first game is played in the USA's second largest city in 2028, 128 years will have passed since the last Olympic cricket match, setting a record for the longest passage of time between consecutive Olympic appearances in any sport. In fact, the last Olympic cricket match is also, as of now, the only Olympic cricket match. The 1900 edition of the Games, which was staged in Paris, are the only previous Olympics to have hosted a cricket tournament, which took place over just one game. As the Olympics return to Paris this year, now seems like an opportune time to discuss the bizarre tale of cricket in the 1900 Olympics. Nowadays, finding the basic details of the one cricket match that took place in the 1900 Olympics is simple. You can see that it took place in the Velodrome de Vincennes and was contested between Great Britain and France, with Great Britain running out victorious. Beyond the surface, however, lies a distinctly unusual background. In fact, we'll see that this was scarcely an Olympic game at all. Even the men who played were likely completely unaware that they were competing in the Olympics. To fully understand the circumstances that gave birth to this match, let's first take a step back to talk about the state of the Olympic Games in 1900. The Olympics today are one of the world's greatest events, but they sprung from small and uncertain beginnings. The modern Olympics take off from the great tradition of the ancient Greek Olympics, which, like the modern versions, were sporting competitions that were held every 4 years and took place in the city of Olympia. The ancient games had faded from historical record in the late 4th century AD, but over the course of the 19th century, various figures across Europe struck upon the idea of Olympic revival. Initially a fringe idea championed by the Greek poet Panayotis Soutsos, the Olympic movement gradually gained momentum through men such as fellow Greek Evangelos Zappas, the British William Penny Brooks, and the Frenchman Pierre de Coubertin. Coubertin's role in the revival has often overshadowed those of other noteworthy figures who organised their own ambitious attempts at the Olympics. Nevertheless, it's important to recognise that Coubertin was a key catalyst in establishing the first truly international modern Olympic Games in Athens in 1896, a big success with participants hailing from as far away as the United States. Yet, any momentum the nascent Olympic movement gained from the successful first edition would soon be halted during the organisation of the next edition, the 1900 Games in Paris. 1900 was set to be a busy year for Paris, for the city was due to host a World's Fair, or Universal Exposition, a grand showcase of the world's culture and great achievements. By this time, Paris had become particularly accustomed to putting on World's Fairs, and the 1900 Exposition would be the city's fifth in less than 50 years, with each successive event being more widely attended than the last. Coubertin looked upon the World's Fair as a grand opportunity where, alongside the other fair attractions, Olympic events could take centre stage in a showcase to the world. Had this idea come to fruition, it would have given the Games a perfect platform. Indeed, the World's Fair ended up being a huge success, visited by over 50 million people across its 7 months of existence. However, hardly any of this success was shared by the Olympics, the planning for which had encountered significant setbacks in the lead up to the summer of 1900. In a poor starting omen for the Olympics, Coubertin's vision was dashed by the director of the World's Fair, Albert Picard, who had a disliking for sport. This early difficulty was compounded after murmurings of dispute began to emerge between the Olympic Committee and another sporting body, the French Athletic Union, over rights to organise sporting events in Paris in 1900. The president of the Olympic Organising Committee promptly resigned and sent the 1900 Games into a disarray from which they never really recovered. The result was a scattered damp squib of a tournament, attended by few and seldom advertised as an Olympic Games anywhere, least of all in Paris. Displeasure around the tournament extended to the competitors. The Australian sprinter Stanley Rowley ended up with 3 third-place finishes in the Games, but was particularly vocal about what he thought of the event. In a letter to Australian newspaper Referee, he writes that The Olympic Games are treated by most of the competitors as a huge joke, and when one comes to think that one has come all the way from Australia to compete in them, it really seems ridiculous. Rowley goes on to rate the tracks used for the sprinting events as the worst grass tracks I've ever seen used for a championship event. So, we've learned that the 1900 Olympics wasn't a competition held in high esteem. But how did cricket fit into all of this? Before 1900, cricket was proposed for the 1896 Olympics, but the lack of potential competing teams forced it to be scrapped. It once again entered consideration for inclusion in 1900, though entries for the event remained thin. The initial four nations who entered included Belgium and the Netherlands, who, in the end, did not participate. Nevertheless, the remaining entries of Great Britain and France were considered enough to stage the tournament. Cricket, therefore, joined a diverse set of sports in the 1900 Olympics, which included pelota, croquet, and tug of war. A tournament in as much disarray as the 1900 Olympics could hardly hope to attract the best cricketers, and the side representing Great Britain would contain no English Test players of the likes of Grace, Ranji, Fry, or Rhodes. Having said that, the team could still count on two players with experience of county cricket, Montague Toller and Alfred Bowerman, who between them had made a handful of appearances for Somerset. Toller and Bowerman were joined by a band of amateur club cricketers under the banner of the Devon and Somerset Wanderers, a squad who had undertaken regular tours since 1894. Another member of the team was the colourful character of C.B.K. Beechcroft, who was described by his biographer Michael Fairley as public house landlord, variety artist, songwriter, comedian and humorist, pantomime villain, socialite, and serial adulterer. On the other side was the surprising presence of France, never a country that has been known for its love of the peculiar bat and ball game played across the Channel. But don't be fooled into thinking there was much of an interest in the sport. The French cricketing community, such as it was largely dominated by Englishmen who had moved to take residence in Paris. Look at the French team, in fact, and you'll find that the majority have English names. In their side was one Philip Tomelin, a London-born man who was captain. As cricket chairman of France's National Sporting Federation, Tomelin's influence was key in organising the Olympic match. For reasons unclear, when the two sides faced off in the Velodrome de Vincennes on the 19th and 20th of August, they fielded 12 players on each side rather than the usual 11. A virtually empty stadium witnessed the triumph of the British 12, who won by a convincing margin of 158 runs. The victory was not always as certain as the raw scoreline might make it seem. After the first innings, France had kept themselves in the game with a 39-run deficit, with France's William Anderson taking 4 wickets and counteracting Frederick Cumming's top score of 38 for Great Britain. In the second innings, however, the British side outplayed France. Half-centuries for Beechcroft and Bowerman were followed by 7 wickets off the bowling of Toller, ensuring the victory. After the match, the Wanderers stayed on in Paris, playing 2 more matches against local teams, winning both before returning home. They came back to an England that was largely ignorant of their achievement. The news of the Parisian matches was only printed in a few select West Country newspapers. As for France, the match at Vincennes was not exactly a moment that triggered a massive rise in cricket's popularity, but rather a curiosity that was regarded by the few who noticed it with confusion. Shining a light on the French view is a report by journalist Gilles Lefebvre in La Vie au Grand Air, the only significant post-match report in the French press. Speaking on behalf of his countrymen, Lefebvre begins, "We haven't yet got to grips with cricket, which appears monotonous and colourless to the uninitiated." Despite this unpromising comment, there is a strain of open-mindedness in the report, and it ends with a note of optimism. Now, let us hope that the following international cricket matches will be able to attract a few more people. The sportsmen of Paris ought to be a little more eager to learn what they don't know yet. As it happened, the events of 1900 unsurprisingly made no lasting impact on the minuscule cricket scene in the French capital. Surviving relics of the Olympic match are thin. The velodrome that paid host to the game is still standing, but any prizes awarded to the two teams have failed to surface. It has been said that the winning Great Britain side were awarded silver medals and the French bronze medals, while both sides were also gifted replicas of the then recently constructed Eiffel Tower. Yet, when the Devon County Council launched an appeal to find the prizes in 2008, their search came to nothing. There also seems to be no evidence that the 24 participants in the match were ever aware of their Olympian status. Cricket didn't feature in the 1904 Olympics, held in St. Louis, but it was the 1908 Games in London that dealt the death blow for anyone wishing for a quick Olympic return. Despite London obviously having facilities, the player base, and, most probably, a willing audience, the game was left out of the London programme. The official report details why. The main principle laid down for the 1908 Olympics was that no competition should be sanctioned which was not practiced by several different nations. For this reason, pelota, baseball, and cricket, for example, were rejected from the British Olympic programme. For over a century, that seemed to be the end of cricket's story as an Olympic sport. But in the last decade, the tide had slowly started to turn in favour of the sport's re-inclusion. Finally, just last year, it was announced that cricket would once again make its bow as an Olympic sport, returning, as we saw earlier, for the 2028 Los Angeles Games. Now, only a few more years remain before the 24 men of 1900 will finally have new competitors to follow them. Thank you for watching.